Hey everybody, welcome back to a new week. I'm again back in my classroom, so that's why you're seeing my face. Um, so as I mentioned last week, meaning me, did a little switcheroo. So we actually were supposed to talk about the Gilded Age last week. You already watched a video on that. I'm not gonna make you rewatch that video. But uh, instead, we did the populist and things like that. So we're going to go back in time a little bit and finish with the Gilded Age, and then we'll catch back up with our normal schedule next week, as in the following week. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen here. Share. Okay, and we're going to get to our slideshow here. So again, we are now going a little bit backwards. Well, really, it's the same time period. It's just we're talking about the uber wealthy, America's Gilded Age. So today is part one, 1870 to 1890. And so the Gilded Age was a period of rapid economic growth, materialism, wealth, and obviously when you have a lot of money and a lot of looking for a lot of accumulation of things, there's a little bit of corruption that goes on with that. The term Gilded Age was actually from the title of a novel by Mark Twain. Again, Missouri's probably most famous writer. And gilded means covered with a layer of gold, which masks a core of little real value. So especially like newly rich people or upper middle class, you want to look like you have gold frames, but that's not really practical. So you could take gold leaf and make it look like it is. It's kind of like adding, like if you're paper macheing something, you're just using this little very flimsy piece of gold paper and gluing it on. Usually looks good afterwards though. We get to now the second industrial revolution. So at the end of the Civil War to the early 1900s, the US underwent the most rapid and profound economic revolutions that any country around the world has ever experienced. Mainly this is due to more advancements in technologies with factory productions. We're getting more and more people that we learned about last week, like immigrants coming in to help with mining. And of course, the railroads. The railroads are going to be the first time that we can get things coast to coast, which is pretty, at that point, was pretty amazing. 1880, the majority of workforce engaged in non-farming jobs. Again, we talked last week about how, and the week before, how there's a lot of things going on weather-wise. There's some droughts. We talked about the new machinery, and that's causing people to just not be able to sustain their families on the money they're making from farming. So you see a lot of people sell their farms and go off to cities to work at factory jobs. So industrialization led to urbanization. Size and numbers of cities increased. The railroad and the national market. The railroad made possible what is sometimes called the second industrial revolution. So the growing population formed a market for the mass production, mass distribution, and mass marketing of goods. Essentially, think of this as, this is when we start to get things like the Sears catalog. And I know some of you in your 20s may not remember the joy of the Sears catalog that some of us older people remember, that around Christmas time, it was a book about, yay thick, and you could just go through the pages and imagine what Santa might bring you for Christmas. Well, this catalog dates back to the 1880s and the 1890s. So this is when, now all of a sudden you can have a store in New York City, and if you wanted to order something, it could be sent by train and get to you all the way in California. It was amazing. This is before Amazon. This was like Amazon beta testing. All right, so if we take a look at, again, we have a primary source here. We've got an original map from the time periods. So on the left of the screen, as you're looking at it, there is the 1860 railroad map. And so before the Civil War, railroad tracks were mainly from like the Mississippi River east. Missouri had been a state long enough to get some railroads, but not very much. We didn't have anything to Springfield yet. Arkansas, Arkansas hardly had a railroad. But you look 20 years later, and now look all of a sudden how covered Missouri is, northern Missouri, and you get that transcontinental railroad. You can go all the way across the continent, and that was a major milestone. It was pretty amazing. So, what's causing all this? It's the spirit of innovation. Scientific breakthroughs and technological innovation spurred growth. And one of the probably more well-known persons that helped contribute to this is Thomas Edison. Now, I'm going to stop here and say, side note, being a professional historian for 20 years, I can tell you that some of the things that he gets credit for were actually not his original idea, like the light bulb. But he took advantage of people that had the idea and they didn't patent their discovery. And so then Edison swooped in and said, oh, well, here's my version of what you already did. So, he still was a good inventor. He just didn't do everything original. But also how he contributed to the spread of electricity. And that's essential to these urban centers and urban factories being able to mass produce things. There's a lot of competition and consolidation when you get into now rapidly growing economy. And this is before we had rules and the government to help control some of this. That meant if you were in business, you were ruthless and you competed a lot and you're probably corrupt a little bit. They wanted to control entire industries. So today we're going to talk about a man named John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie. And they were so good at what they did, but they basically took over their industries. Smaller firms, basically, they're getting bought out. Think of this as, the Main Street movement now that we have going on in America today. With Amazon, with super Walmarts and super Targets, mom and pop shops have been basically almost run out of business because they can't compete with the lower costs of a supermarket or an Amazon facility. So, this was going on back then too. And the government at the time is using something called laissez-faire, which basically is like, you know what, you guys do your thing. We're not going to interfere. You're doing pretty good. People are making money. We're not going to worry about the little guys. And so they didn't regulate or oversee businesses. So what could be some problems with a laissez-faire model? Let's see if this is going to take us to, it's going to be probably a video. And what I'm going to do is I'll just go ahead and put this link into our Google Classroom so you guys can take a look at it later. All right. So let's meet some of these guys. And there's going to be two very short Edpuzzle videos on these guys. Andrew Carnegie. By the 1890s, Carnegie dominated the steel industry. He basically, it's called vertical integration. What does that mean? Basically, he cut out the middleman. So before, or like a lot of companies today, let's say your product is making widgets. And your widget requires the steel to be produced. It also requires some like oil. And usually before this, you would contract out and buy the oil from the oil people, buy the steel from maybe Carnegie. What Carnegie's doing is he's saying, I'm going to own the oil fields. I'm going to oil the steel mills. And that way I don't have to waste any of my money on any other companies. It's just all my profit because I own every step of the process. In theory, that's a great idea, except for then you run other people out of business and it is no longer fair. And then there's John D. Rockefeller. He's the one that's going to dominate the oil industry. Again, he does the same thing. He buys out and merges with competitors so that he's owning any other business interest in this field. So he kind of is also known as a robber baron, which is kind of a bad name at this time for any businessman who's really successful, because they figure that they're doing something unethical, and there was some merit to that. I'm not gonna lie. So here's a question to think about: were these men geniuses, or were they robber barons, limiting healthy competition and robbing from the poor to benefit the rich? I think once you see the videos, you might probably have a better or more definitive answer. So now, during this time, one way to address these people is to have political cartoons, newspapers, and basically everyone was fair game. It's kind of like social media today. All right, so let's take a look at this. As a primary source here, we've got a gentleman sitting on a barrel of oil, and it says Monopoly on that. This is before the Monopoly game. In one hand, he's holding up a globe that says the world, and in the other hand, he's holding up, oh, what is that? An oil lamp. And he's wearing a little crown there. So, of those two guys we just mentioned, Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller, which one is this? I was about to do the Jeopardy do, but I'm not going to do that. It's in fact John D. Rockefeller. And does this show him in a positive light? Not really. It shows him as he's so arrogant and he's taking over everything with the oil industry. And look at all those money bags underneath. Here's another one that has to do with Mr. Rockefeller. And this time he's represented by an octopus. This is really kind of actually, political cartoons could be pretty funny. And look at his tentacles. On the left, he's got his little tentacles all around the White House. And over to the right, my face thing is blocking it. Another one of the government buildings. And then you got all these other business leaders that are being just totally eaten up by Standard Oil. So, Rockefeller wasn't viewed all that positively back in the day. Now, here we believe again, Rockefeller, and he's very, very large here. And you've got the Congress, and if you notice what's in front of the Congress is a bunch of oil barrels. And then the White House, where I guess that's the president hiding with some money. So basically saying, hey, this guy controls the White House, controls Congress. So that's where we're going to leave it for today, and we will pick this up tomorrow. Again, we'll see you. Have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow.